Hey everyone, this is Unit 6, Lecture 4, all about adolescent development. There's only one learning target, but it's not even that complicated, but it's really telling to adolescents, and it's the fact that we're going to focus on the challenges of adolescence. And we all know that this time in your lives can be very, very challenging, and we're going to dig into why and how. Okay, the first topic is physical development, because that really marks the beginning of adolescence, which is puberty. So roughly between the ages of 11 and 14, sex organs mature, and that's when someone goes from basically childhood into this category of adolescence. When that happens, whether you're on the early end by 11 or you're on the later end by 14, you're an early or late bloomer, can greatly influence your self-image. Let's get into how or why. So first of all, if you are maturing early, that basically means that you look older, and that can have some interesting effects. For boys, they tend to do better in athletics. They're probably larger than some of their peers. They tend to be more popular and have a more positive self-concept, perhaps because they seem more manly earlier. But they also tend to have more difficulty in school, commit more acts of delinquency, and abuse substances more. Again, maybe they're treated like an adult before they should be. Girls, if they mature early, they tend to be more sought after for dates and have better self-esteem because they are getting some of that positive, well, not positive, but they are getting some of that attention that can be construed as positive. But if their body is maturing faster than their emotions, they might not be ready for it. They also might be teased or sexually harassed if their bodies are more advanced, if you will, than some of their peers. And then we can compare that to those who are late bloomers or mature a little bit later in that puberty stage. If this happens to boys, they are often smaller, less coordinated than their peers, and this may lead to teasing, ridicule, and they might be seen as less attractive. And over time, those same boys might start to view themselves that way and then struggle with their own self-image. Girls might end up in a relatively lower social status and might be overlooked in dating and question what is wrong with them. But they tend to report greater satisfaction with their bodies later, mainly because late maturers tend to be tall and slim, which is society's typical idea of beauty. Brain development, on the other hand, is a little bit less complicated, just in the sense that it's the same for everybody. And that is that your frontal lobe and your prefrontal cortex, where you hold judgment and planning and those sorts of things, is not fully developed until your mid-20s. So you are still experiencing growth in your myelin sheath for better communication in the brain and like a faster connections and messages being sent and processing. You are still experiencing synaptic pruning of unused neural connections. So if you've got some neurons or dendrites that aren't being used, they do kind of disintegrate and go away. And while that sounds like a bad thing, it can be a good thing because it results in improved judgment, impulse control, and planning, because those messages can be sent faster and smoother with some of the excess ones kind of gone. However, in adolescence, you are still dealing with, or your brain is still dealing with, hormonal surges and limbic system growth, and that can still result in impulsive, risky behavior and intense emotions. So it is fair to say in your late teens and early 20s, you can kind of defend yourself with, well, my brain's still developing. I'm not done yet. I'm not done cooking up here yet. Cognitive development in this section is actually pretty easy because it's just a review of the idea of Piaget that by adolescence, one is in formal operational stage. You begin to reason hypothetically and deduce consequences. It leads to greater understanding, comprehension of broad moral principles, so stuff that we already talked about. But this cognitive development, while this seems kind of small, it leads us to a new category, which is moral development. So not just cognitive, like thinking and problem solving, but morally. If you've hit that formal operational stage, morally, how are you making decisions? And we are going to focus on a theory by a man named Lawrence Kohlberg. And Lawrence Kohlberg devoted his life to studying morality and how and why and when people will make the judgments that they do of what is right and wrong. And he believed that that moral reasoning helped guide our judgments and behaviors. And he had a discontinuous theory. So he believed that people were moving through levels in a fixed order, and you're not necessarily going to jump from one to one, and there's not even a gray area where one blends into the other. He also, here's his picture. He also claimed that one could not reach the highest level until at least 13 because of that brain development factor. One of the interesting things about Kohlberg is he tested his levels of moral development, or these stages, by posing moral dilemmas to people and seeing how they would solve them. So let's take something really basic. Let's say a teacher leaves an answer key for a test out on her table and she leaves the room. If you're in the pre-conventional level, you are going to perform your actions based on rewards and punishments and purely based on your own self-interest. This is typically how a young child thinks. Am I going to get in trouble, or am I going to get a benefit? So if you're thinking like that, you might be like, oh, she left the room. No one's going to know. I'm going to take all these answers. I'm going to do well on my test. Yay for me. Nothing but good things for me. If you are in a conventional level, you are strictly interested in pleasing others and doing what is right by society. So either I'm going to take this test, I'm going to use the answers, get a good score, my family will be happy with me, and heck, maybe I'll even share these answers with my other friends because then they'll think I'm cool too, and then everything's all good. Or maybe you say to yourself, I'm not going to take that test because if my parents did find out, they'd be super disappointed in me. Or if my friends found out, they might think I'm really shady and I don't mean to be. So it's not right. And I'm yes or no going to take this test, steal this test, but it's purely based on what others would think of that decision. The highest level for Kohlberg is the post-conventional level, and this is when you use higher reasoning to guide your behavior. You think of a sense of equality or justice. If I take this test, who else might it hurt? Is it fair to the other kids who I'm not sharing the test with? Is it fair to that teacher who worked hard to write that test and maybe doesn't even realize that she left it on the table? And so what is the right thing to do? You might live by the golden rule in terms of how would you want to be treated, even if it means you could get away with something. It doesn't always mean doing following the rules. Maybe the right thing is to break the rules. And you know what? I am going to take this test because this teacher's been really awful to my friend and hasn't helped them at all. And I'm going to do it because it's what's right by my friend and they deserve this help. They deserve this other chance. Okay. Whatever it is, you're doing it based on maybe an ethical sense of justice, equality, and so on. Kohlberg didn't think that many people made it to this level of reasoning. I tend to think people do make it to this level, but maybe they just don't apply it every single time. That's just my opinion. All right, we have reached the most difficult part of this lecture, and that is Erik Erikson's theory on social development, also known as psychosocial development. When you think psychosocial or you think psychoanalysis, you should think kind of like Freud. So we have this id, ego, superego. We have these little ideas in our mind or in our consciousness or subconsciousness that are just constantly duking it out. And so this theory, and here's Erik Erikson. This theory says that the ego is constantly acquiring attitudes and skills to contribute to its development, but it's doing so as it tries to resolve a conflict at each stage of someone's life. And that you have to resolve this conflict to have a healthy outcome, specifically a sense of identity. And that is defined as the self-concept that comes from consistently unifying these roles. You might be able to tell already that this is pretty tricky stuff. Erikson always also talks about that this could vary based on culture. This is a theory that's hard to test because it's based on subconscious and unconscious conflicts, but it is still pretty popular. I also want to emphasize that as I go through this stuff, Erikson is defining changes within ourselves and within our interactions with others in society. So all of these conflicts that we're going to talk about can either be like internal, within, or with others. Okay. This is my heads up to focus on listening, thinking, and then writing, because there's a lot on these slides. And to focus on how does the name of the conflict make sense with what is going on at this stage of life. I'll try to cue you on this, but listen, let's go back to that. Listen, think, then decide what to write down, and really think about what you know of that stage of life and why the name might make sense. All right, getting into it. Here we go. The first one is trust versus mistrust. So this is ages 0 to 18 months. Think of a baby's life. They are trying to see, can I trust this world? I'm new to this world. Is someone going to take care of me? Is someone going to give me what I need? Is someone going to give me food? Is someone going to change my diaper? And so on. If parents, do parents care about you? Okay. If you get a secure sense of attachment, you'll develop a sense of trust, predictability, and you're going to start to trust the world. But if you have inconsistent care and the parent's not reliable or doesn't always respond to your needs, you might develop a sense of mistrust or paranoia. At ages 18 months to about 3, the conflict is between autonomy and shame and doubt. You're asking yourself, do I have control over my life? Can I do certain things, or are my parents always going to restrict my behavior? So parents set boundaries, yet let the child make some decisions. They're going to develop a sense of independence. We've heard this before with our parenting theories. If they're overly restricted, the child will be unable to assert themselves. And if parents are too lenient, children might become overly demanding and controlling. So that parenting style really kicks in here. Will they have a sense of shame or self-consciousness? This is the phase of potty training. Okay. So what's a toddler's life like? They're testing boundaries. They're trying to find out, are they going to be allowed to make any decisions of their own? Is someone going to make them feel bad if they make the wrong choice? That sort of thing. So that's the struggle in the toddler years. Between 3 and 6, so a little bit more advanced toddler, very young child, the struggle is initiative versus guilt. Are you able to do things by yourself? Can you take that initiative? You're curious, you're playing imagination and pretend games, you're trying to do your own thing. If a parent reacts positively to this, the child will often feel confident taking other risks, gain self-confidence, and know, like, yeah, I can test out the world. I can do new things. I don't always need to look for that help. I don't always need to look for approval. However, if the parent reacts negatively to the choices or someone trying to do something for themselves, even if they mess up, that child will lack self-sufficiency, have low self-esteem, and fear punishment. So they should be exploring their environment independently, venturing out for themselves, trying to do things by themselves. But what is the parent's reaction going to be? Next, between 6 and 11, so your elementary years, the conflict is industry versus inferiority. So think of industry, almost think of it like a factory. Like, what are you producing? Are you capable of doing things socially, of being productive, of doing things on your own? School is really important in this stage. Are you finding tasks that are within your wheelhouse that you can have a sense of pride in? Or are you finding out that you're not so good at certain things and then you feel inferior or not as good as others, and then that's where you struggle? So an idea of basically finding your strengths and your weaknesses, your elementary years. Next is the conflict and stage of your life, and that is identity versus role confusion, targeting the ages 12 to 20, your teenage years. This is not just me placating you or trying to make you feel important, that this is the most important phase of your life, but according to Erickson, this is legitimately the most important age of your life because it's the most critical. It's really determining who you are and who you're likely to be for some time to come. So think about this stage in your life. You are trying to figure out who you are. What's your place in the world? You're no longer a child and you're almost an adult, but not quite. Do you know who you are? Are you able to set goals for your future adult self? If you are confused at this stage, you might have an unstable identity and try out socially unacceptable roles. Maybe trying to be edgy or rebellious just to see what happens. And maybe one day you're edgy and rebellious and the next day you're following rules and trying to please mom and dad still. This is such an important stage. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. This is the stage where you're feeling pressure to identify with what you want to do with your life. And it's really important to you, and it feels impossible. You're trying to separate yourself from your parents, but you're trying to please your parents. You're trying to rely more on your peers and build social relationships, but then be an independent man or woman. This is that pivotal, critical time where a lot of the choices you make are going to affect you for decades to come in some cases. No pressure, right? And Erickson believed that you have to find yourself in this stage first to figure out who you are in order to develop strong, expressive personal relationships in the future. You don't have to agree, but this is Erikson's theory. Next is the stage between your 20s and your 40s. Some texts will say your 30s, but we're going to round up on this time, between intimacy and isolation. And this is when you are determining, can I love and can I be loved? Am I okay with being open and vulnerable and being intimate with someone and feeling connected to someone? Or do I kind of want to be withdrawn and isolated and close myself off and maybe not build those relationships? You are quite focused on career, finding a life partner, developing close-knit friendships. So basically, this is the stage of, are you committing to things or not? The stage between your 40s and your 60s has, I don't know that I love this name, but it's generativity versus stagnation. So think of what it means to generate something, to produce, to have purpose, versus being stagnant. Like, are you stuck? Are you just going through the motions and not, your life is not progressing? So between 40 and 65, people want to know, am I productive? Am I giving back to the world? Am I making a difference? You might be a parent, and so you're probably shaping the lives of others. Do you feel a sense of accomplishment that in your early stages of your career that you matter and that it's paying off and things that you've worked for are having results? Or do you feel worthless and you're having a midlife crisis? And then the last stage, according to Erikson's theory, is integrity versus despair. Has it all been worth it? Kind of reviewing, reflecting on your life. Are you happy with where you are? Do you have a sense of acceptance? Are you content? Or do you look back with regrets and wish that you should have done this and you should have done that, and just feeling disappointed? Okay, so you're constantly struggling with this. A quick reminder, in all of these, you're not one or the other. This is the conflict that you're going back and forth and back and forth, back and forth throughout these years of your life. And here's a summary chart. Now, I don't want to negate everything I just went through, but I would go through and check what you wrote down to what's on each of these rows and see, does your description match what is happening at this stage? If you feel like it helps you to write some of these down, you may, but you certainly don't need to copy this chart word for word if you got a lot of notes from what we just went through. So have no fear, we will make sure to review a lot of this stuff in class because this is a tricky one. But if you are focused and listening well and thinking and writing notes in your own words, you should be in good shape.